Hello, everyone. I'm Jeannie Linky Northrup with Applied Clinical Trials. I'd like to welcome you all to today's broadcast, The Past, Present, and Future of Mobile Visits in Decentralized Clinical Trials. Today's webcast is sponsored by PCM Trials. PCM Trials, boasting over 15 years of experience in delivering mobile visits, they specialize in mobile nursing and research services for clinical trials. Focusing on patient-centric decentralized studies, PCM Trials excels in efficient and high-quality remote visit facilitation, enhancing trial participation and data collection. We have an awesome panel joining us today, so I'm really excited you could all join us. I think you'll really enjoy their presentation. However, before we do begin, I have just a few important announcements I'd like to make. First and foremost, this webcast is designed to be interactive, and so we encourage you to ask questions to our experts throughout the event. You can submit any questions you have by typing them in the Q&A box. That can be found at the bottom of your video player. You can, in fact, enlarge the slide window for viewing purposes by clicking on the small icon in the bottom right corner of the media player. Please note, however, that all slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If you do happen to experience any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, click on the question mark help widget located in the top right of your presentation window. Now I'd like to welcome and share the floor with Ellen Weiss of PCM Trials. Ellen will moderate today's discussion. So Ellen, welcome. Please feel free to take the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We do have a global audience today. My name is Ellen Weiss, and I am Strategy in Decentralized Trials, Emeritus here at PCM Trials. I've stepped back from full-time work and more than full-time travel in this year, 2024. And my role here at PCM is expanding as PCM very recently has added some new firepower to our arsenal of tools that allow us to take the trial to the participant. PCM recently acquired Clinical Trial Services, CTS, out of Losser, the Netherlands, greatly enhancing our global abilities. And most recently, on the 27th of February, so just a couple of weeks ago, Invenio. So the acquisition of Invenio does change what we do a little bit. I'll just take a moment. We are now empowering local community-based clinical trial access in what we think is the most patient-centric way possible, which could be in the home or a mobile site nearby, and we can do this across the globe. So thank you, Jeannie, for introducing me and a little bit about PCM Trials. And with me today are two very important personalities in the environment that is decentralized trials around the world today. I am joined by Craig Lipset and Michelle Kelly. I'll leave it to each of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get on to our topics for today, wherein this sort of a masterclass, be it, if you will, where we're looking at the past, what it has affected in our present, and what we think might be coming in our future. So Craig, the Dean of Decentralized Clinical Trials, for many of us who do this work, please introduce yourself and welcome.
Ellen, you might call me the dean, but I do not have emeritus as a part of my title. And so congratulations to you on that milestone and all the impact that you've made over your career. And I look forward to sharing perspective and learning with you as we think about the past, the present, and where this puck feels like it's heading. For those in the audience where I haven't had the pleasure, my name is Craig Lipset. Today, I split time as co-chair of the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, DTRA, which is a global nonprofit collaboration, including dozens of organizations, pharma, tech, service providers, health systems, as patient groups, government agencies, all working together on the shared mission to improve access to research participation around the world. I also serve as an educator and mentor, teaching on the faculty at Rutgers University in a master's program in clinical research management, serve as an advisor and board member, both with for-profit and nonprofit organizations like the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with all of you.
Thank you. And joining us in a bit of a last minute change, you may have seen that Deb Gawadari, who is a consultant in our industry, formerly of Pfizer, was scheduled to join us today. She could not make this engagement. We hope to engage with her again in the future. And stepping in is Michelle Kelly, who is a teammate here at PCM Trials. I will let you introduce yourself and your very appropriate for today's discussion role.
Thank you, Ellen. So I am the head of research technology at PCM Trials, and for the last, I have to say, 3 decades, I've been at the front lines of executing clinical trials and implementing technology. I am essentially a hybrid. So after starting as a CRA with an educational background, a master's in clinical research, worked my way through executing and then providing oversight for the execution of numerous clinical trials before my passion for technology shifted me into a completely different direction, working for Sun Microsystems, deploying technology across multiple industries, and then returning back home to clinical research, but bringing that breadth of experience and technology knowledge kind of back to the clinical trial industry. And for the last 15 years or so, have been deploying substantial systems across industries, so CTMS, ETMF, et cetera. And then, of course, adapting to the decentralized trial movement and the embedding of new technology, directly into industry, shifting the way we all conducted research, bringing us to the forefront of today. So my experience is truly in the practice and implementation of technology and clinical trials.
Well, thank you for your flexibility in joining us. And again, these sessions, and this is not our first applied clinical trials sort of conversation that we're holding, where those of us who have been in this industry for some time maybe can offer the balance of both our experience and our excitement for the future. I wake up every day thinking, and what will I see? And what will the impact be? And how will this ultimately affect patients? And the news is pretty great. So in my travels, even as emeritus, I am still on planes, perhaps a little bit more than the average person. Everywhere I go, I am seeing AI. And in my frequent industry conference experiences, my guess is that 1/3 to 1/2 of the presentations at large-scale conference reference AI in their session titles. You may have experienced this yourself. This very month, March, the FDA has published a pretty short, for them, it's only 7 pages, summary of their intended plans to address AI in research on medical products. We are always attuned to their slightest utterance, and this, I think, is an important one. We'll have that PDF available for any of you who request it from us. By the way, just reach out to my email address and I'll see that a member of the PCM Trials team can provide that to you. And there are 4 items that I took away from that guidance. The 4 areas that they seem to be concentrating on in this short document is fostering collaboration. Yay, we hear that a lot. Second, exploring advanced approaches to support innovation. I am very excited to see this, the second attribute, because if we don't collaborate and get there together, we don't get there, or we get to many different destinations. Third, to support research into best practices in the evaluation and monitoring of AI and its deployment. Very important. Could it be that all of us have collectively learned some lessons from the past, that if we don't collaborate and we don't find meaningful ways of measuring, it's for naught? And lastly, the FDA hopes that they can help promote harmonization of standards and guidelines. Wow, harmonization. I think I've been hearing that for at least 2 decades, Craig. I know that you have as well. And I am heartened to see a thoughtful plan to get the fundamentals in place for eventual harmonization in the use of AI. That's been a 2-decade quest, and AI, which may have appeared divisive to many in our community, may actually be the conduit and the way forward to making harmonization more than just a soundbite or a dream for the future. It may be our coming reality. So given this guidance, and I know we all had a chance to preview it and look at it, all of us in the room here today are innovators in decentralized clinical trials. So are there lessons from the distant and perhaps the more recent past that have been applied here? And do you see the fingerprints of that? Craig, I'll start with you. Your opinion matters greatly to me.
You know, when I think about the lessons learned in DCT and maybe how those can help influence our thinking in other types of innovations, there's certainly the appreciation that this is a very long change curve, but then there are catalyzing events. The pandemic was certainly a catalyzing event for the adoption of decentralized trials, but sometimes those catalyzing events bring a bit of chaos and a perception of chaos. And so how do we make sure that we seize the momentum of a catalyzing event while also making sure that we pace and throttle ourselves, that we're ensuring sustaining, responsible, long-term progress and adoption? I think that when we think about DCT adoption over the last 3 years, there was a frenetic pace, which drove a lot of challenges with different vendors, primarily around different technology platforms that made things difficult for sponsors to sustain. I think sponsors were rather frenetic as well, and maybe didn't apply all of the diligence that they would traditionally do when considering some of the different strategies that one needs to deploy. I think in some cases we moved quickly around investigators rather than with investigators and research site staff. In our sprint to deploy tools just to sustain trials during the pandemic. And in some cases, we may talk about the patient, but not necessarily include the patient. And we often will say that we're patient-centric, but are we really embodying it? And I'll give an example. I think it's easy for us to deploy decentralized approaches in ways that we can rationalized as being patient-centric, but may not be in the eyes of a patient. And so are we creating space and distance and leaving patients feeling alone and isolated with unfamiliar technology when we're decentralizing? Or are we using these tools in ways that make a person feel even more connected, even more supported with research, agnostic to when their visit schedule is or their distance to that site? I think that we can lose track of some of those goals in a rush to try to deploy. But I think another lesson for me, and this was a phrase I learned, I think Chuka Esiobu from Define Ventures brought this up at the DTRA annual meeting last year. He said, Craig, the tourists have left our space. And I think there's a certain reality to that, you know, a few years ago, it was all about blockchain, and you saw companies popping up left and right, screaming blockchain this and that. And then maybe a lot of them changed their signs in the DIA booth saying we're DCT companies. And now those same companies, their booth now says we're AI companies, and they'll keep moving on to whatever that next shiny object is. It doesn't mean that there isn't real opportunity in blockchain, DCT, AI, but there's a certain commitment and staying power that's needed to see these things through, right? We get all excited about what's new, but eventually the tourists leave and the committed remain. The committed are here on the screen. The committed are here in the room listening to this session. The committed will continue to have conversations about these areas because they didn't just travel in here with a lot of hype and now jump on to the next shiny object. They're committed to making sure that we can deliver on these models and that we can actually make sure that this is a sustaining model that creates positive change with the KPIs and the evidence to back it up, as you mentioned earlier, Ellen.
Yeah, it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. But I am super excited because, here at PCM, we were viewed in the DCT space and we'd been in it almost as long as it's existed, 16 years this year. Sweet 16. Home visits themselves are into their mid-20s now. We're maturing. But the fundamentals of getting it right and getting the service needed to the patient where the patient is willing and able to accept it presents some unbelievable challenges. Michelle, I am out there connecting sponsors and CROs and patient groups and everyone. You're the one that makes it actually possible. What is your thought on lessons from the recent past that you are applying now?
That's an excellent perspective, and to hear, your thoughts shared as well. For an industry that I would say initially started in a place of historically late adoption, right? And a very risk-averse view to technology for very good reason, right? For very good reason. Patient safety first, right? Data first. To move through the journey that was technology enablement through decentralization, as you said, sped up by the pandemic and the necessity to adapt quickly to technology, resulted in not only a substantial shift forward in terms of capability, but I think a recognition of what it takes and the complexities to deploy technology out into the field to be able to meaningfully adopt. So shifting into this new era of AI enablement brings an entirely new set of challenges to the on-the-ground implementation and adoption over time that I think the lessons learned from the past are going to enable us to more effectively move into the future. And that is not just from the perspective of implementing through, CROs and sponsors on the ground, but our regulators. I think there's recognition that getting in front of and understanding technology, the pros, cons, the necessity to implement standards, harmonization, provide the framework and guidance such that we can be confident in the deployment is perhaps a change that we're seeing based upon necessity. So I think we are at a unique time where the pace of technology advancement is so fast that we need to be more adaptive than we've ever been, but at the same time, ensuring that we don't eclipse the foremost individual that is the participant that is experiencing the trial on the ground. And it's going to be a very interesting journey over the next few years.
Very true. So in the comments that you both shared, and thank you for your perspectives, I'm finding a commonality in the need to get the fundamentals right by everyone, from the logistics carrier who's out in a van with a sample or a kit to the agencies themselves, literally from the ground to oversight and the agency to which we must all answer to. Michelle, can you share from your role within PCM, because we are moving data and we are moving data with precision and with intent and with great care. as a quality supplier in an innovative space, what have been some of your guideposts? Because it is so much all at once. Can you share with us some thought around what receives the attention first? And if there is something that really is the genesis of all, is there a route that you then follow outward?
So from the standpoint of being a supplier, it is absolutely necessary to build a foundation of excellence within standards and processes that you can consistently reference, adhere to, and employ. So digital health technologies, overarching in general, require a vantage of validation, of testing, of consistency in ensuring the quality of what we deploy per standards, and then maintaining that as we continue to expand the tools, technologies, et cetera, that are in the ecosphere. So when considering technology, it has to be considered in context of the regulatory environment, the ability to confirm that what we are deploying is capable of obtaining the data results that are required. In the end, the data acquisition is at the core of what we do. So ensuring that any technology that we deploy in the end is resulting in the ability to obtain reliable data, reliable information, while at the same time ensuring patient safety is at the heart of all technology deployments.
Thank you. Craig, did you have any thoughts to add? I know we attend many of the same conferences, and I walk away thinking I understand, and then another piece unfolds, and I feel like I have to begin again. So you're kind of in the center of this information exchange. Do you have thoughts around that innovation space and just what a supplier who is gathering the data, what is it that you believe are some important bellwethers?
Well, I think you said the question very much the right tone of getting the fundamentals right. And in our space, there are two guardrails that we all operate within, right? Patient safety and data integrity. Those are our core fundamentals. Those are the tripwires that thou shalt not cross. We may self-impose other constraints and boundaries according to our vendor selection processes or other SOPs, but in truth, these are the two rails that we can't cross. And fortunately, I think our ecosystem has stayed well within those boundaries. We've had a lot of deployments in a lot of countries with a lot of different models that people have deployed, but data integrity and patient safety have been respected by all stakeholders, and we all have to cheer for that, because a failure for one creates a challenge for many in this space. I think a lot, though, about this desired future, because you mentioned around the many stakeholders involved, logistics providers, so many pieces of the puzzle. There's this desired future state that many sponsors and players will all kind of point to as our aspiring North Star in this space. And it's not, we want everything to be fully decentralized. Most people talk about creating choice and flexibility and optionality for participants based on where they are in their journey. And I think that is the right language to use. But when we think about the complexities of our operating model today and all of the different stakeholders involved, it is hard to see the straight line today to be able to scale and operationalize at a reasonable, cost-effective way with an ROI somewhere baked in, how we can deliver on that, given all the choices we may want to share in front of a participant, that maybe they want the visit at home, maybe there should be a visiting nurse, maybe it's on video with their study coordinator, maybe they're going in for that next visit, maybe they're going to a local pharmacy or community health center. Maybe there's a mobile unit that's parked down the road for a period of time. There's so many different models that the idea that I could decide on the fly, right? Maybe it's a few days before, but that I could have that type of choice and all of the downstream consequences that my choice brings for so many different stakeholders can start to feel mind-boggling, can start to feel overwhelming. The other day, I upgraded my phone the other day. Yay!
Oh.
And I used my carrier's website, and I went through the process. And at the end, it said, do you want to pick up your new phone at the Verizon store? It'll be in the locker for you. Do you want us to DoorDash it to you? Do you want us to drop it in the mail? It'll be there in 2 days. Oh, and to return your old phone when you're done. Do you want a QR code to bring it to the UPS store? Do you want a return shipping box? Do you want to bring it into the Verizon store? And as a consumer, we're just getting so used to this, right? But we know on the back end, that's 1,000 different levers that have to be coordinated, that now somebody in a local third-party Verizon store, it's not even Verizon owned, is going to pull something from inventory and make it available for me for an order that I placed online through the manufacturer. There's just so many logistics on the back end that we as consumers shouldn't have to see or worry about, but it's the type of choice and flexibility we need. And so as I think about, we have to have our fundamentals right, but as we think about also this desired future state we want to create, who will be the players that start to step in and manage that level of logistics on the back end so that I can have the simplicity and choice that I deserve as a participant on the front end?
Well, thank you for that, because it's like, did you crawl inside the mindset here at PCM Trials with our recent acquisitions? We have taken anticipatory actions, and are very grateful that our position as an independent supplier with some resources, we were able to go out into our ecospace and envision a future where all of these attributes can be responded to, because it is about ultimately, the patient should be the decider. I think we nailed that, Ken Getz. Thank you for raising my awareness some 20 years ago on this topic, and I've followed that path since. But it does lead me to another question for you all. We tend to be a bit myopic, sitting as we do in the United States of America, about what needs to happen for our mandates, for our agency, for FDA. This wave of change is global. And how does this play out in the rest of the world? Do you anticipate some challenges? Craig, you're at the forefront there with DTRA, which seems to be the common gathering place, the lunchroom, so to speak, of our School of Clinical Research. We all gather there. What can you anticipate globally for our future?
First off, there are many regulators around the world that make clear that they have eyes on the FDA and the EMA. And so certainly, many other agencies are looking to some of them to kind of lead and step forward. PMDA certainly as well in Japan. And I think they're rising to that challenge, deploying guidance, recommendations, papers, and coming out and sharing perspective publicly, showing up at DIA, DTRA annual meetings and other spaces to participate and bring their voice, just as the FDA has been doing here in the U.S. I think it's acknowledged that we operate in many cases in a global, with a global expectation of how we deploy our trials. And so one initial question that we've worked to demystify, actually we did this in a podcast we did at DTRA with Kim Hawkins from Sanofi and some of her team, demystifying the myth that if I can't do it everywhere, then I can't do it anywhere, right? That myth that if I can't use e-consent in Germany, I can't use e-consent in my trial. If I can't do a home visit in Japan, then I can't do home visits in my trial. And so we have to get people certainly past that we have always deployed culturally appropriate local implementations around our studies that work right within local expectations, regulatory, ethical policy, as well as within cultural expectations. Yes. Doesn't mean we're not still following one protocol globally. So I think there's a bit of myth busting there that we have to sometimes remind people and reinforce. But there is some good harmonization that's starting to see daylight that we're seeing in some of the revisions at ICH, and the regulators remain committed to working together in those spaces. We have some new circles that we've launched in DTRA, which bring stakeholders together around shared challenges on a monthly basis. And we've launched these now in Japan and in Europe in particular to help bring those communities together, but also create spaces that link those conversations to global conversations. A circle for trials in Japan isn't just for domestic Japanese colleagues, it's for others around the world looking to deploy globally to come and share and listen and learn together. And so, one other note I'll share is it's interesting when you look at the FDA's draft guidance on DCT, there's certainly a lot of thoughtful perspective that's shared there. There are opportunities that are set up. What about this role of a healthcare provider supporting routine care activities? When you look at the recommendations paper from Europe on DCT that came out the December before the FDA's, there is a very heavy focus on investigator oversight, investigator control, investigator respect for the role of the investigator. And so these messages aren't in opposition to one another, but how do we as global operators make sure that we're listening to all these perspectives when we're considering our global strategies? They don't pull in any way in opposite directions, but they provide some different areas of focus that we need to be mindful of when we're planning our global strategies.
And I can say with great delight, a visit in Japan was on my career bucket list. And in December of last year, days before my retirement, PCM actually performed a first home visit in Japan, and 7 more have followed in the short interim. And I think I chipped away at that block of ice for 12 years before it actually happened. And it was thrilling to me that it happened on my watch. Of course, I had very little to do with the actual execution of the visit, but it's something that I had fostered and spoken to medical students in Japan for a decade about. And, you probably shared my experience. You would meet with the younger generations at conferences or I was very graciously invited to lecture to medical students in Japan, and the students would pepper me with questions. And then at the very end, a professor would stand up and say, but this is not for us. And the discussion just deflated. And this went on year after year. And maybe, just maybe, I took such great hope from that. So, Michelle.
Ellen, I have a request for your next webinar then. I think it would be really fascinating to have a visiting nurse from Japan, from the US, from Eastern Europe, and just talk about cultural differences and cultural expectations, because I think for some, they'll have heard snippets that in Japan, there's reticence around home visits because of the burden on the homeowner of welcoming a visitor or guest into the home, and that there's so much extra work created there that they'd rather just travel to wherever that site is. But, as a Westerner, I hear these and I respect expect these, but I'm not getting them firsthand. And so sometimes these become like a game of just passing the story on to the next person, and it gets slightly tweaked and modified along the way. These types of firsthand accounts could be really interesting for this audience as we think about our global considerations.
I have made a note of it, sir, and we will make that happen. But it was on my bucket list, and it took a lot of effort, a lot of conversations, one-on-one in groups, whatever it may be. But as I look at, for instance, that December 13th, 2022 EMA utterance, Michelle, I know that is a big part of what guides your work as well. From a global perspective, are there unique challenges in decentralization from your chair? You have to make those systems compatible with each other. Can you comment on what you see happening there?
So I see, and I think this is tied to opportunity as well. Technology tends to be, because it is static, right? Technology is generally static, but the deployment of that technology is in fact adopted through a cultural lens and through a unique environment. So something like AI coming into the foreground, right, where it is less static than the technology that we have been accustomed to, and potentially more adaptive as it is embedded throughout the globe, actually offers a high level of potential for harmonization, for data exchange to be facilitated in unique ways that we haven't considered before. At the same time, the adoption rates, the comfort with embedding new technology into the way that we execute is very tied to the individual, the biases that are within a particular lens, viewpoint, et cetera, so that we have the standard capability, the level of adoption, the way that implementation will actually be executed is going to absolutely be dictated by regional and local interpretation and preference. So it is, again, we're at the forefront of the new. At the same time, I think we understand the challenges with deploying in a uniform method. I think, Craig, you hit it exactly, that when you actually are at the point of implementation, that the absorption is absolutely dependent on the environment in which it is being conducted within. So.
And I think, kudos to FDA. And again, we will have a PDF of this recently published guidance available that right on the cover, it is artificial intelligence in medical products, how CBER, CDER, CDRH, OCP are working together. We can hope that the world will follow. At least that's my hope, that we will have true harmonization. Certainly, we've all trained others in GCP and really the discipline that it is, and harmonization. And I would look at young staffers and they would just look at you quizzically like, would that ever happen? Well, maybe AI, which again was viewed divisively and with fear in the beginning, maybe is going to be an unexpected bridge at a time when we really, really need one. So the three of us that are here today have been around for decades to watch DCT develop, and then the pandemic sped everything up with the pace of acceptance of not only devices, wearables, telehealth, remote services. Sites have become more and more important in this work. The PIs within those sites, critical also. And in this current and very busy present, we see that the patient is at the forefront of everyone's comments, and this includes sponsors, CROs, and thrillingly, agency. So a pat on the back for efforts to reach this point. But part of my mission today is to guide us to the future. What excites you most about the near-term future, given the wins that AI has given to the industry? Craig, please, your thoughts. We've come a long way, and it feels like a big inflection point. I'm just wondering what you are feeling.
I think I always want to be mindful and respect the fact that there are many in our community that remain very fearful of all of these terms. Yes. E-source seems intimidating. DCT seems daunting. AI seems frightening. And very often it's because we let our minds gravitate to the most extreme use cases for every one of those scenarios. I could never decentralize my trial because that means it's fully decentralized and everything is done remote. I could never use AI because that would mean everything is robotic and automated and half of my workforce is going to be displaced. These extreme examples hold us back. They prevent us from being able to access near-term opportunities that can create, meaningful progress, meaningful improvements and processes today. And so I often will, begin some thinking on this topic by just encouraging those whose minds may gravitate to the most extreme scenarios to just try to take a step back and think much more incremental, because that's the path of progress and change in our space anyway. We're not going to drop everything we're doing in clinical trials today to suddenly implement studies that use no patients, where everything is simulated, where all patients are synthetic and all of our data is based on algorithms. Are there futures out there where some patients may be replaced in trials by an algorithm with synthetic data? Absolutely. And interestingly, keep in mind when we think about who fears being removed the least in this process, it's the patient, right? Tell any other stakeholder that some of their role in clinical research may be impacted by AI and they become frightened. Tell a patient that they may not have to be enrolled in a control group in a clinical trial because of AI, and they'll say, sign me up, right? Let's go. As long as there's trust and confidence in the data, the process, and transparency around it. And this, to me, is the first step around what we may think of as harmonization. It's too early to call it standards. It'll be a natural evolution of how we think about best practices, but just making sure that we have some baseline of understanding of what good looks like, especially when it comes to the fear of black box algorithms, not understanding if there are biases in the data that was being used to train those machines, and not having some decent understanding of how these machines are operating. Now, in artificial intelligence, are we ever going to really understand everything about how that decision is being made? Well, with humans, do we have an understanding of everything that's involved in my head right now for the decisions I'm making? God, if you do, let me know, right? But what we do know is how I was trained. We can have transparency around that, and we can monitor the outcomes of the work that's being performed. And so, once again, we shouldn't let ourselves get mired in the granularity that we have to understand absolutely everything about how every machine is working, because like any other neural network that's biological, we don't always know every detail of how that machine is working. But again, having transparency to know that was the machine trained in a biased way so that the information might lack trust, and do we have the right tools and oversight around the work that it's doing to have confidence there? As we think about some of these opportunities with AI in our space, there are many that are very accessible for us as we think about, strategies that can improve patient support, as we think about strategies that can improve some of our oversight tools that we can start to provide investigators to make sense of diverse data and have better visibility around quality and ensuring compliance and patient safety, remembering our guardrails. And then we'll have some use cases that may feel a little aspirational, but don't call them science fiction, because people are doing real work there and data is going in front of regulators with heads nodding. So while I can talk about, what will the future look like as we have fewer patients in our trials because we're replacing them with digital twins, and some might say, oh, that sounds like a great story for your next science fiction comic book, except for the fact that people are submitting data in front of regulators in the US and in Europe, and they're agreeing. with the approaches that are being taken. I think as we think about AI and decentralized, there are some great use cases we'll be able to talk about there as well, but I really want to hear what Michelle is thinking on this topic.
So quite honestly, I see so many of the immediate benefits in relation to AI being perhaps less impactful or patient tangible, right? There is so much, you hear a lot about the advances in molecular analysis, or you said digital twins, right? We are sort of at that bridge of initial foray into those areas. However, we've all been adapting, or the vast majority, things like ChatGPT, generative AI, which in itself is having such a substantial impact to what I would say are the back-end processes that we all have to execute, the day-to-day activities that are sometimes challenging, and the efficiency and allowing us to move more into higher level thinking activities, and to allow some of the burden of what would be more task-oriented or tedious things, right, to be taken by technology, and free us to be able to dedicate our time, energy, etc., into what requires actual human interaction. It allows for example, the consideration of patient first, how we can worry less about implementing the technology itself and focus on how that's impacting the individual, making the human connection, etc. So the benefits that I see in the near term, though there is so much happening that is innovative, to me, it's freeing all of us to be able to employ where it has most impact our energy. The other area that I'm actually seeing the potential for substantial movement forward is in data aggregation, analysis, analytics. It's some of the things that may not be, highlighted as the most innovative, outwardly, focused results of AI. But if you think about how challenging it is to pull together data sets, to communicate from a technology perspective with each other, that there is the potential to employ AI in that regard. And again, that is taking the heavy lifting sometimes that is more task oriented, that can be done through technological means, have that occur in that way, and then put our human focus into analyzing the results that are actually initially presented through an analytical engine, through algorithm. So I see this being a fairly long-term trend towards adoption, where you see some innovation, at the cutting edge, but hopefully a lot of adoption occurring in a less flowery or showy way, but that's having a true impact to the way that we are all conducting business day to day.
Right. So it's interesting. We're kind of coming to the end here. And I've made notes and I'm listening carefully. And from my chair as a service provider, I'm noting the speed of change. And during the pandemic, PCM was one of those companies that was forced by circumstance and just the press of need to scale up and staff and do it quickly. And we are continuing on this vein that we can meet our needs of today and the anticipated needs should another emergency occur. And I'm just thinking, with the deployment of AI, how much different and how much quicker and how much more efficient could a response like that be? So part of our strategy here was that acquisition and the robust efforts to build out that capability to respond everywhere as needed. And certainly if the global community had to call on us again to respond with speed, agility, and precision to solve another emerging crisis, we know that we can serve sponsors and their CROs in the former situation, but we stand ready with strength if the latter were to emerge again, should it be needed. And I think that's the great gift of AI, is I think we have enough confidence with it as a collective that should it be needed again, just think how much better and more robustly and more uniformly we can respond. So it is super helpful that we have discussions like this one. I'll remind our audience before I move to some questions, we've got some great questions, that we will make available that PDF from FDA, or if you have pressing questions about your own upcoming trials, large or small. And thanks again to Craig and Michelle for your time and thoughts and your vision. So in our question box, I'm going to open that up and see what we have there. So a first question is, it looks like from a sponsor side, wouldn't it help the DCT industry if they could generate robust data, not just on soft metrics like patient centricity, but on hard metrics too, which have direct dollar value to sponsors around recruitment, enrollment, and completion timelines? And thank you for your question. And I guess I'll kick that off. We do have some of those statistics, which can be generated looking back. Happy to share those. Craig, what are your thoughts on now we have to put brackets and dollars and cents and clocks around decentralization? Do you think we've made progress on that front?
So within DTRA, we've defined key performance indicators that matter to sponsors and other stakeholders. And what has been very frustrating and challenging has been the effort that's required to gather data across our category, to understand across sponsors what's working and what hasn't, and what are the KPIs and what do they tell us. And a lot of that is because sponsors aren't tracking this. And so initially we've done some work with Tufts around this to start to try to gather data across sponsors to aggregate. But this has been a brute force, very manual effort for a lot of sponsors. And what we've been leaning on at DTRA has been, can we normalize definitions so that sponsors can better track consistently in their CTMS platforms which trials are using which decentralized methods in which places around the world. And consistency, so the two main themes here are, one, we need people to track these things consistently using widely accepted definitions of what is a decentralized method, and two, we need them to track them in systems that they already have. Most sponsors, CTMS platforms, have the capability to track this, but they're not being used. And we've talked to CTMS platform after platform about how their sponsors are using this, and they're not tracking it. Most sponsors are still tracking this on spreadsheets or back of the napkin in terms of which studies are using which different partners and vendors. And so where today sponsors need this type of evidence more than ever, this is a call to step forward and work with us and the rest of the community to start tracking this and using definitions that are widely accepted when you do so. From there, gathering KPIs is not rocket science. We aggregate as an industry CTMS performance data from sponsors on a regular basis to generate benchmarks across the industry around performance. What we're missing is our ability to segment that data and look at how did this work for a trial with X decentralized method versus one that didn't. And for that, we need sponsors to step forward.
Agreed. As a supplier, we would love to tout statistics right, left, and sideways, but we are bound by confidentiality in the MSAs that we hold with these companies. We, for some of them, understand this is their secret sauce. This is how they get where they get as quickly as they get there. Maybe the use of a service like ours is somewhat proprietary in the outcomes. So, you know, we're taking steps. Certainly, we would love to share what we do with everybody that we do it, but we are bound by contractually some of the things we cannot share. But I thank everyone for that question. That was Nicholas who asked that question. Another question we have is, do you see a potential reduction in remote in-person visits with improvements in technology around self-collection of various assessments? including self-blood collection devices and wearables. And certainly a question from Tom, from our audience. And, I really don't, Tom, and I will tell you my reasoning on that as a supplier. And, we are making big bets on a very healthy future. Certainly our trajectory has been positive. We have not seen the diminution many in the home visit industry have over the last couple of years. We're still on the grow. I believe that DCT has not had its moment and is now shrinking into the shade. I really don't. It's discernment of what is known. I don't think we'll ever go back to our pre-pandemic levels of 2019. To give you an example, in 2019, I'm a very busy person, and I was thrilled that I captured 72 requests for proposals. And I thought that was a really busy year. In 2020, that skyrocketed to 881, 800 of which I had to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It was too big, too fast, not appropriate, impractical for whatever reason. And looking back on 2023, that number, I don't hope we don't hit 881 because that was a fever pitch of activity, but we're rounding in around 300-400 every year. I don't think we'll ever go back to 2 digits in any given frame of time. So that's what I know, and I'm very excited for that future. I don't think we'll disappear. Craig, did you have any thoughts?
No, I think that I hear this a lot of, I'll hear a few things. Some will say to me, decentralized trials are a thing of the past. It's just about decentralized methods now. And I think, well, what do you think the definition of decentralized trials is? Because if you look at FDA guidance, EMA recommendations, IMI trials at home definitions, DTRA city, no one defines a decentralized trial as fully decentralized. It's always been and will continue to be about the methods. Will DCT start to slip backward? I think for some companies, everything is slipping backward right now because of just industry-wide belt tightening. That is not a unique phenomenon for decentralized methods, but if companies remain committed to listening to patients when they're planning and designing their studies, these methods will prevail and they will stand the test of time as long as we remain committed to listening to patients about their challenges and barriers to participation.
Great. Well, we're just about at the end of our time. That hour flew by. In this series of conversations that we're having with applied clinical trials, I always like to finish with this last question. And Michelle, you're answering it for the first time. Are you convinced that, I think we're convinced DCT will withstand the test of time. What is the one thing you wish for every patient considering a trial that they be offered from this time point? I know my answer has morphed over time. So what is your wish for the patient of the future? And what assurance can we offer them?
So my answer is that we continue to listen to the desire of the and to conform accordingly, which means flexibility in the way that we implement, not trying to force a particular methodology, and remaining in tune and connected.
Well, thank you. From your technology standpoint, it's heartening to hear such a human response. And Craig, has your answer changed even in the 2 months since we last spoke?
You know, I'm going to mirror, I think, what we just heard with Michelle. I hope that we can demonstrate that patients are being heard. And that means being heard when we're planning and designing our studies, that we're listening to them and incorporating those insights, being heard when they have needs around choice and flexibility about how they engage, being heard when they have concerns and fears and need different types of support, so that no patient feels that left alone in any of these trials. So it's very much mirrors, and I hope amplifies a lot of the thoughts that Michelle just brought.
Interesting. We began our conversation focused so intently on AI, which many of us in our world today perceive as dark and cold and impersonal. And here it is. It's all about human to human. And every time a patient is diagnosed and they come into our trials and they are dosed and they are tested, it is a human to human activity. And I thank you for your visions about what our future can bring. And I think that concludes our presentation. Jeannie and Applied Clinical Trials, did you have any final thoughts or words?
Ellen, I echo everything you said. I watched Michelle's eyes light up when you talked about it being so dark, right? Craig, Michelle, thank you so much for your insight today. Really great points. Our audience members also had some really great questions. Not to be discouraged if any questions were missed today due to time. Our presenters will respond offline as well. So thank you for your attention today as well. And as we conclude and wrap up, I want to thank PCM Trials for making this continued series available with ACT. We'd like to ask everyone if they would kindly participate in a brief survey that'll populate on your screen as today's presentation concludes. We greatly appreciate your insight. As we mentioned, that insight is really important to us having that flexibility and individualizing things. You'll also receive an email alerting you when this webcast is available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's event. So again, thank you to everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.